I'm now joined by Navy Secretary Carlos del Toro, who has served in numerous positions, and completed several tours of duty at sea during his decades-long naval career. He joins us today to discuss how the United States Navy is strengthening maritime dominance and bolstering crucial relationships with allies and partners. Secretary del Toro, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us. Look, I'm obsessed with the Navy and trying to understand how we compare, us versus others and, kind of get all this stuff in the right package. And I'm just going to start out and ask you on that question about maritime dominance. If you look at China, and I'm not telling folks China is only threat. There's a lot of dimensions of China. But one thing they seem to be really good at is building naval vessels. And right now, if you look at the number of naval vessels that China has put out in the Pacific, my understanding is they've got about 360. We have about 297. They're slated to have 400 by 2025. Do you worry about us maintaining a pace of naval vessel presence? And is there a difference between quantity and quality in what we have versus what they have? Oh, you're muted, Mr. Secretary.
Steve, thanks for having me here. It's great to be here with you and viewers this afternoon. And yes, the Secretary of the Navy worries about everything. And certainly, you said that China is really good at building ships. I would argue differently. They're probably not that great at building ships, but they build them in great numbers. And that's a marked difference as well, too. The quality of our ships and the capabilities that we have on our ships significantly outpace the quality and the capabilities that they bring to bear as well, too. And I think that is important for the comparison of how many ships we have in each other's navies. It's really not just about the ships. It's about capacity, it's about capability, and the combined lethality that it actually brings in deterring our aggressors from what they want to accomplish.
The other, big piece of news that we're at right now is sort of looking at the broad multi-dimensions side of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and watching the heroic, I have to just call it heroic and, I shouldn't say surprising because maybe our intelligence should have been better that we would have expected such resilience in Ukraine. But I know you've been outspoken and say, hey, there are a lot of perhaps underestimated dimensions of the Russian Navy, not Soviet yet, but the Russian Navy and submarine force, and that there are other maritime dimensions to conflict that we need to be taking seriously.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Steve, and I don't think that we should necessarily underestimate the Russian Navy predicated on the underperformance of the Russian Army. There are two distinct services, and the Russians have invested a lot in their submarine undersea capabilities, and so it's important for us to make sure that we invest in order to maintain and exceed the pace at which Russia invests in its submarines as well. And also its surface combatants. As we see now, we have more Russian surface combatants in both the Black Sea and the Mediterranean than we've seen in a long, long time. And it's important for the U.S. Navy to be able to deter that in every possible way. And we are doing that with the number of ships that we have in the Mediterranean currently.
Mr. Secretary, I don't know if you heard my conversations with the Deputy Secretary of Defense and others, but I've been having conversations all week, actually, where, I think it's come to finally an appreciation that what we used to call a phone, which we carry around, is no longer a phone. It's a computer, it's an interaction with the web, it's, a database, an old Rolodex, all of these other dimensions of what a phone used to be. A car is no longer a car. It's also an information system. But I'm wondering, whether or not we need to think, about the nomenclature of how we think about ships and weapon systems and others. And as we kind of move into a world of AI, quantum computing, and other dimensions, whether or not, I know we need ships and naval vessels, and I was just kind of counting numbers, but what are these new next generation technological qualitative dimensions of warfare that you're helping to steward forward?
Well, that's exactly right. And as Secretary of the Navy, it's incredibly important to obviously build the appropriate capacity to meet the threat and deter China and Russia and any other aggressors around the world. But the capability that goes on those platforms is equally important. And as we look at
so we may have just lost Secretary del Toro. the Pentagon has very hardened and very thick walls, so we'll have to see whether we can bring him back up here right now. But to my point earlier, and just to share with the audience my own editorial perspective, is I sometimes think we count the wrong things as we begin thinking about areas of competition in the world. It's going to be how well systems operate, how well communication operates. We were talking, later in this program about the Space Force, we were already talking about the Space Force actually, and how that is really a function of satellites and managing communications and instruction through a lot of different platforms and systems. So hopefully we can continue that conversation with Secretary Del Toro, because I think that's the area, and then it raises the questions of how we continue to invest in this revolution in technology in systems. And as I was discussing with the Defense Deputy Secretary, the interconnectivity between all these different dimensions so that communication and instruction travels seamlessly. Continuing our conversation with Secretary Del Toro, we go back. Secretary, it's great to see you. I was just sharing with our audience that we were basically kind of talking about layering in all these different forms of technology that makes the question of what the quality of a military service is, as I was discussing with the Deputy Secretary of Defense, the connectivity and communication between all sorts of different platforms is really there. I'd just love to kind of get your sense of the dashboard, because I think one of the big things is we saw Russia engaging in more hybrid conflict tools, cyber disruption. How good are we at that stuff?
Well, you're absolutely correct. And I would argue we're very good at it. And actually, this year's budget submission reflects the fact that we're investing an enormous amount of money in R&D in all the right places, whether it be cyber, space, hypersonics, quantum computing, artificial intelligence. And those are the capabilities that our platforms, whether they be on the surface or subsurface or in the air, demand in order to meet the more challenging threats that are being posed by our adversaries.
One of the things that you have said is the only thing Vladimir Putin understands is strength. And we have a complexity where we're both, I think, very officially trying to be supportive of Ukraine without crossing certain red lines regarding formal NATO participation in conflict. How do you show muscle when we've built in restraints on power at a moment which is really one of the worst violations of territorial sovereignty that we've seen in many generations? How do you blend power into constraint?
Well, one of the best ways to actually do that is to show President Putin that the world is united against him. And, I just came from a trip to the Mediterranean where I went aboard the Harry S. Truman, where we're conducting trilateral operations with the Charles de Gaulle from France and the Cavour from Italy. And it's this combination of nations working together and actually providing that deterrence to President Putin in every possible way, whether it be at sea or whether it be ashore in Eastern Europe with our NATO partners in Poland, Romania, and other places, Germany and Spain and France and England, all working together to basically show President Putin that he has no allies and friends, and that he really does need to come to a more diplomatic solution and coming to a closure on the situation in Ukraine.
Another dimension that's unfortunately, come up in this conflict is, Russia's nuclear posture, our nuclear posture. I mean, I started out in my career, folks, as a young Randite, as someone who worked at the Rand Corporation at what was then called the Rand Soviet Center. Now the Soviet Union is gone, but Russia is still here and has nukes. But there's a generation of people, there's been a lot of time, since we've had lots of arms control types, and that people that were, real experts in all the dimensions of nuclear power and warfare. But you are a steward of a significant portion of America's nuclear deterrent. I'd just be interested in how that is working out right now when we have someone flirting with talking about nuclear weapons. Is that one of your up at night issues?
It is. It's critically important, and our Navy and our nation is actually making major investments in the modernization of our nuclear triad, particularly the portion at sea where we're investing in Columbia-class SSBNs and modernizing our weapon systems as needed to demonstrate that to Putin and others that we do have a real capability and that we should avoid discussions of actually using nuclear weapons. We want to try to resolve this conflict in a peaceful way.
We're getting right to the end of this. I want to ask you, not a facetious question, but an important one. I knew and was at the Halifax International Security Summit with one of your predecessors, Secretary Richard Spencer, then Secretary of the Navy, and he was involved with a military court of justice issue involving a former Navy SEAL, and he talked about chain of command and instructions and authority, and made a comment at that moment that he didn't recognize a tweet as an order. He called me that night and he said on the record, well, Steve, I was wrong. A tweet turns out to have been an order. And he was a go. But it raises interesting questions about command and control authority, decision making, who the players are. And I'd just be interested, Mr. Secretary, since that time, that was not a trivial moment. And I'm just wondering, when it comes to presidential command and control, and it comes to the chain of command in the military and your role, et cetera, how wobbly are things? I don't know if that's if there's a better way to put it, but is a tweet a command as far as you're concerned?
Well, the good news here, actually, Steve, is that neither President Biden nor Secretary Austin nor myself have any confusion at all about what orders are issues, and I think all three of us try to avoid issuing any orders via tweeting.
Well, fascinating conversation. Secretary Del Toro, I hope you'll come back. It's great to do this in two parts, but thank you so much for what you're doing and spending time and sharing your thoughts with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here with your viewers, and thank you all for your support for the Department of the Navy, for our beloved Navy and Marine Corps. The sailors and the Marines that serve at sea really appreciate it.
I should say you have 900,000 sailors and Marines, reservists, and civilian personnel under your care. So that's a very, very big job. So thank you so much, Mr. Secretary.
It's a tremendous honor and a privilege to serve again.